The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble corridors of the Capitol as Kash Patel adjusted his tie and checked his watch. 9:12 a.m. The Budget Oversight Committee hearing was supposed to be routine, another mundane discussion about federal spending allocations that would barely make the evening news. But Patel had other plans entirely. The heavy oak doors of Committee Room 2154 groaned as he pushed them open, his leather briefcase weighing heavier than usual. Inside, 47 pages of meticulously documented evidence would either vindicate his months of investigation or destroy his credibility forever. The chamber buzzed with the typical pre-hearing chatter: aides shuffling papers, journalists checking their phones, committee members reviewing their notes. Chairman Morrison, a silver-haired veteran of 30 years in Congress, called the session to order with 3 sharp raps of his gavel. The committee will come to order. Today we continue our review of discretionary spending in the executive branch. Patel remained seated in the witness gallery, watching as the first hour dragged through predictable testimony about office supplies and travel expenses. His moment would come during the public comment period. Congressman James Coleman, the ranking Republican member, looked particularly relaxed, occasionally whispering jokes to his colleagues. The man had built his career on defending presidential prerogatives, and today would test every skill had accumulated over 2 decades in the political arena. At 10:15, Chairman Morrison's voice cut through the drowsy atmosphere. We now open the floor for public testimony. First witness, Mr. Kash Patel. The transformation was instantaneous. Cameras swiveled, journalists straightened in their seats, and the previous lethargy vanished like morning mist. Patel's reputation preceded him. The former national security advisor who'd become Washington's most persistent voice for government transparency. When he requested speaking time, people listened. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Patel's voice carried clearly through the chamber's acoustics as he approached the witness table. Distinguished members of the committee, what I'm about to present will fundamentally challenge our understanding of how taxpayer dollars have been utilized by the highest levels of our government. Coleman's eyebrows rose slightly, but his expression remained neutral. Years of political poker had taught him to never show his cards early. Patel opened his briefcase with deliberate precision. Over the past 6 months, through careful analysis of federal expenditure records, I have uncovered a pattern of spending that demands immediate congressional scrutiny. The first photograph hit the overhead projector like a lightning bolt. A designer gown, elegant and unmistakably expensive, filled the screen. This dress, worn by the First Lady at last year's state dinner, cost American taxpayers $147,000. A collective gasp rippled through the gallery. Committee members leaned forward, their casual postures forgotten. Coleman's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. That's a single evening's attire, Patel continued, his voice steady and methodical. But this represents merely the beginning of what I've discovered. Image after image flashed across the screen: a handbag worth $35,000, shoes priced at $18,000, a necklace valued at $250,000. Each revelation landed with surgical precision, accompanied by receipts, purchase orders, and billing statements bearing official government account numbers. Coleman could no longer remain silent. Mr. Chairman, I object to this character assassination masquerading as budget oversight. The gentleman is attacking the dignity of the president's family based on what appears to be stolen private information. I assure the congressman these documents were obtained through proper legal channels, Patel responded without missing a beat. Freedom of Information Act requests, publicly available spending reports, and congressional disclosure requirements. The First Lady has constitutional obligations to represent our nation with appropriate dignity, Coleman shot back, his voice rising. These expenses reflect the symbolic importance of her role, not personal indulgence. Patel turned to face Coleman directly. Congressman, would you consider $2.3 million for a single week's wardrobe during the European diplomatic tour an appropriate representation of American values? The number hung in the air like a challenge. Several committee members exchanged worried glances. Morrison called for order as murmurs spread through the gallery. Furthermore, Patel continued, returning to his presentation, my investigation reveals these purchases were consistently categorized under various budget lines, diplomatic protocol expenses, official entertainment costs, and ceremonial requirements. The pattern suggests a systematic approach to obscuring the true nature and scale of these expenditures. Coleman stood abruptly. This is nothing more than a politically motivated attack designed to embarrass the administration during their first year in office. The gentleman's well-known opposition to the president makes his credibility highly questionable. My political views are irrelevant to mathematics, Congressman. Patel's response was ice-cold. The numbers speak for themselves. Would you like me to present the detailed accounting? For the next 20 minutes, Patel methodically dissected expense report after expense report. Each purchase order told a story of luxury goods acquired with federal funds, Italian leather accessories, French couture gowns, Swiss jewelry, custom-designed accessories. The committee watched in growing amazement as the total climbed steadily upward. The preliminary calculation, Patel announced, consulting his notes, indicates expenditures approaching $50 million over the past 18 months. The chamber erupted. Journalists frantically typed on their phones, committee members demanded clarification, and Coleman's face had turned an alarming shade of red. This is preposterous, Coleman thundered. These figures are wildly exaggerated and taken completely out of context. The first lattice wardrobe expenses are a tiny fraction of overall diplomatic costs and entirely appropriate for her representative duties. I would welcome the opportunity to compare my documentation with the administration's official records, Patel replied smoothly. Full transparency would resolve any discrepancies immediately. Morrison struggled to maintain order as the hearing devolved into heated exchanges between supporters and critics in the gallery. The committee will maintain decorum, or I will clear the chamber. Coleman leaned into his microphone. Mr. Chairman, I demand to know the source of these alleged documents. The Privacy Act protects personal financial information, and if these materials were obtained illegally, this entire presentation should be stricken from the record. Patel had anticipated this line of attack. Every document I presented today is either publicly available or subject to congressional oversight authority. The American people have a right to know how their tax dollars are spent, regardless of who benefits from that spending. The momentum was clearly shifting in Patel's favor. Several Democratic committee members began asking pointed questions about oversight procedures and spending authorization. Even some Republicans appeared uncomfortable with the mounting evidence. But Patel wasn't finished. As the clock approached 11:30, he reached for a sealed envelope that had remained untouched throughout his presentation. Mr. Chairman, before I conclude, there's one additional matter that puts these expenditures in an entirely different context. His voice dropped slightly, creating an expectant hush throughout the chamber. The evidence I've presented today represents only what's visible through conventional accounting methods. Coleman's eyes narrowed as he sensed a trap closing around him. But I have reason to believe, Patel continued, his words measured and deliberate, that these documented purchases were conducted through intermediary companies specifically established to obscure the paper trail. In essence, a sophisticated financial structure designed to hide the true scope and nature of these expenditures from congressional oversight. The envelope remained sealed in his hands, but its presence dominated the room like an unexploded device. Every eye was fixed on it, every breath held in anticipation. Coleman's face had gone pale. Mr. Chairman, I demand immediate recess for consultation with legal counsel. These allegations constitute serious accusations that require proper legal review before proceeding. Morrison looked torn between his duty to maintain order and his curiosity about the envelope's contents. The political implications were staggering. If Patel's claims proved true, the scandal would dwarf typical budget controversies. The committee will recess for 30 minutes, Morrison announced finally, his gavel echoing through the stunned silence. As the chamber erupted into chaotic activity, Patel carefully returned the envelope to his briefcase, leaving everyone to wonder what bombshell revelations lay hidden within those sealed pages. Coleman hurried from the room, already reaching for his phone, while journalists fought to be first with the breaking story. The first battle had been won, but Patel knew the response would be swift and merciless. Coleman hadn't built his reputation by backing down from fights, and 30 minutes would give him time to prepare a counterattack that could destroy everything Patel had worked to expose. But for now, the truth was out there, spreading across social media and news networks like wildfire. And sometimes, that was enough to change everything. The 30-minute recess felt like an eternity compressed into seconds. Kash Patel remained in his seat, methodically organizing his documents while observing the frantic activity around him. Journalists clustered in urgent huddles, their phones buzzing with calls from editors demanding immediate updates. Committee staffers whispered frantically into wireless earpieces, and the gallery had transformed from a sleepy government chamber into the epicenter of a political earthquake. Through the tall windows, Patel could see news vans arriving outside the Capitol, their satellite dishes extending skyward like metal flowers reaching for the sun. The story was already breaking across social media platforms, trending hashtags spreading faster than official statements could be crafted to contain them. At precisely 12 p.m., Chairman Morrison's gavel restored order to the chaos. But the atmosphere had fundamentally changed. Where there had been routine boredom before, electric tension now crackled through every conversation. Congressman Coleman returned to his seat flanked by 3 additional staff members, a clear signal that the administration was escalating its defensive strategy. The committee will resume, Morrison announced, his voice carrying new weight. Congressman Coleman, you requested an opportunity to respond to the testimony. Coleman stood slowly, his earlier flush replaced by the calculated composure of a seasoned political operative. In his hands, he carried a leather portfolio that hadn't been present during the morning session. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the committee's patience while we gathered the necessary documentation to address these serious allegations. His tone was measured, professional, but underneath lay steel. What we've witnessed today is a masterful example of how selective presentation of facts can create a completely false narrative. Patel's eyes narrowed slightly, but he remained silent, allowing Coleman the rope to either climb to safety or hang himself with. Let me begin, Coleman continued, opening his portfolio, by establishing the proper context for these expenditures. The role of First Lady is not merely ceremonial, it carries enormous diplomatic significance. When she represents America abroad, her appearance directly impacts our nation's international standing. The first document appeared on Coleman's overhead projector, a State Department protocol manual dating back decades. Official guidelines clearly establish that appropriate attire for diplomatic functions is not only permitted but required. The alternative would be to send America's representatives to international events looking inappropriate by global standards. Several committee members nodded, finding this reasoning more palatable than Patel's stark financial presentations. Furthermore, Coleman pressed his advantage: the gentleman's calculations are deliberately misleading. He presents gross expenditure figures without accounting for the fact that many of these items serve multiple official functions over extended periods. A gown worn to 3 state dinners represents cost per use efficiency, not extravagance. Patel finally spoke. Congressman, are you suggesting that a $147,000 dress becomes reasonable if worn multiple times? I'm suggesting that context matters, Mr. Patel. When the Queen of England spends millions on her wardrobe, we call it maintaining royal dignity. When our First Lady spends far less representing the world's most powerful democracy, you call it scandal. The comparison was clever, and Coleman knew it. Several Republican committee members visibly relaxed, apparently satisfied with this explanation. But Patel had spent months preparing for exactly this counterargument. The Queen of England doesn't use American taxpayer dollars, Congressman. And I notice you haven't addressed the central issue, the accounting methods used to obscure these expenditures. Because those allegations are completely unfounded, Coleman shot back. Every purchase was properly authorized through existing government procedures. The fact that different budget categories were used simply reflects the complex nature of federal accounting systems. Complex indeed. Patel reached for another folder. Let me help clarify that complexity. The next image on Patel's screen showed a purchase order dated 6 months earlier. This document authorizes payment of $85,000 to Continental Cultural Consultants for ceremonial advisory services. But Continental Cultural Consultants doesn't provide advisory services, it's a high-end fashion boutique in Manhattan. Coleman's confident expression flickered momentarily. Government contractors often operate under various business classifications. The services provided clearly related to ceremonial requirements. And this payment to International Protocol Solutions for $120,000 in diplomatic support materials? Another document appeared. The address matches a jewelry store in Beverly Hills. The committee chamber had grown quieter, members leaning forward to scrutinize the documents more carefully. Even some of Coleman's usual allies appeared troubled by these revelations. Mr. Patel seems determined to criminalize normal government contracting procedures, Coleman responded, but his voice lacked its earlier certainty. Normal procedures involve accurate descriptions of goods and services, Patel countered. When office supplies cost $50,000 and turn out to be designer handbags, that's not normal, that's deliberate misrepresentation. The mathematical precision of Patel's presentation was devastating. Each mislabeled expense revealed a pattern of systematic deception that transcended simple accounting errors. Purchase orders labeled as facility maintenance that corresponded to luxury spa treatments. Transportation services that matched bills from exclusive boutiques. Communication equipment that aligned with jewelry store receipts. Coleman attempted a different approach. Even if we accept the gentleman's interpretation of these expenditures, the amounts pale in comparison to waste found throughout government agencies. The Defense Department loses billions annually to contractor overcharges. Why target the first lattice modest wardrobe expenses? Modest? Patel's voice carried genuine incredulity. Congressman, the total we've documented exceeds the annual budget of several small federal agencies. This isn't about scale, it's about transparency and honesty in government spending. It's about political targeting, Coleman fired back. The gentleman's well-documented opposition to this administration makes his motives crystal clear. This is character assassination disguised as budget oversight. The accusation hung in the air like a gauntlet thrown down. Several journalists scribbled furiously, recognizing the moment when political discourse shifted from policy debate to personal combat. My political opinions don't alter mathematics, Patel replied coldly. If these expenditures are legitimate, the administration should welcome full disclosure. Transparency protects the innocent and exposes the guilty. Coleman played his next card carefully. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to call forward Dr. Margaret Whitfield, former chief of protocol under 3 previous administrations, to provide expert context for these expenditures. Dr. Whitfield, a distinguished woman in her 70s, approached the witness table with obvious reluctance. Her testimony was carefully coached but appeared genuine. Protocol requirements did justify significant wardrobe investments for senior officials. International diplomacy operated under unwritten rules about appearance and presentation that couldn't be ignored. But Patel had anticipated expert witnesses. During cross-examination, he established that even generous protocol allowances wouldn't justify the scale of spending his investigation had uncovered. Dr. Whitfield, in your experience, what would constitute reasonable annual wardrobe expenses for a First Lady fulfilling all official obligations? Perhaps $2 to $3 million annually, accounting for formal events, international travel, and seasonal requirements. So $18 million annually would exceed even generous estimates? Dr. Whitfield hesitated. That would be unusually high, yes. Coleman immediately objected. The witness is being asked to speculate based on incomplete information. The information is quite complete, Patel responded. Shall I present the month-by-month breakdown? For the next 40 minutes, Patel methodically demolished every defense Coleman offered. Each excuse was met with documentation. Every justification confronted with receipts. The pattern was undeniable: massive expenditures disguised through creative accounting and mislabeled purchase orders. As the afternoon wore on, Coleman's confidence visibly eroded. His objections became more desperate, his explanations less convincing. Several Republican committee members had stopped nodding supportively and now studied their notes with troubled expressions. At 2:45 p.m., just as Patel was consolidating his evidence for a devastating final presentation, an aide hurried into the chamber and handed him a folded note. The young man's face was flushed with excitement, suggesting urgent news. Patel read the message twice, his expression shifting from concentration to surprise to something approaching shock. The chamber watched in fascination as he carefully refolded the paper and placed it in his jacket pocket. "Mr. Chairman," Patel said slowly, "I've just received information that significantly changes the scope of this investigation." Coleman straightened in his chair, sensing either opportunity or danger. "A former White House staff member has come forward with additional documentation that I believe the committee needs to review immediately. This individual was directly involved in processing these expenditures and can provide insider testimony about the authorization procedures." The announcement electrified the chamber. Journalists grabbed their phones, committee members exchanged urgent whispers, and Coleman's face went ashen. "Mr. Chairman," Coleman interjected quickly, "this is highly irregular. Any new witnesses should be vetted through proper channels before." "The witness is already in the building," Patel interrupted, "and prepared to testify under oath about what they observed firsthand." Morrison consulted with the committee parliamentarian before making his decision. "Given the gravity of these allegations and the public interest involved, the committee will hear from this witness. However, standard verification procedures must be followed." As arrangements were made to call the mystery witness, Patel allowed himself a small smile. The sealed envelope in his briefcase remained unopened, but this unexpected development had potentially given him an even more powerful weapon. Coleman was already on his phone, speaking in urgent whispers to whoever could provide guidance for this rapidly deteriorating situation. The afternoon had not gone according to his carefully planned strategy, and now an unknown insider threatened to completely unravel the administration's defense. In the gallery, journalists prepared for what could be the most explosive congressional testimony in years. The mystery witness represented either vindication for Patel's allegations or the final piece of evidence needed to transform a budget dispute into a genuine political crisis. The chamber fell silent as footsteps echoed in the corridor outside, approaching the doors that would soon open to reveal the person whose testimony might determine the fate of a presidency. The silence that followed the mysterious footsteps was deafening. Every head in Committee Room 2154 turned toward the heavy oak doors as they slowly opened to reveal a woman in her mid-30s, impeccably dressed but visibly nervous. Sarah Chen had worked in the White House for 8 years, rising from junior staff to senior administrative coordinator, a position that gave her access to virtually every financial transaction that crossed the First Lattice office. Chairman Morrison gestured toward the witness table. "Please state your name and former position for the record." "Sarah Chen, former Senior Administrative Coordinator, Office of the First Lady." Her voice was steady despite the tremor in her hands as she adjusted the microphone. Congressman Coleman immediately leaned forward, his earlier confidence replaced by barely concealed panic. "Mr. Chairman, I object to this irregular procedure. This witness hasn't been properly vetted or scheduled according to committee protocols. The witness has proper security clearance and first-hand knowledge relevant to these proceedings," Patel interjected smoothly. "Given the public interest in these matters, I believe extraordinary circumstances justify extraordinary measures." Morrison consulted briefly with the parliamentarian before ruling. "The witness may proceed, but all testimony will be subject to verification through official channels." Chen took a deep breath before beginning. "For the past 18 months, I was responsible for processing payment authorizations for Mrs. Trump's official activities. What I witnessed contradicts everything that's been said in her defense today." The chamber was so quiet that the soft hum of the air conditioning system seemed unnaturally loud. Coleman's face had gone pale, while Patel maintained his professional composure despite the satisfaction evident in his eyes. "Ms. Chen," Patel began carefully, "can you describe the normal procedure for authorizing expenditures from the First Lattice office? Standard protocol required detailed justification for any purchase over $5,000. The justification had to specify the official function, expected diplomatic value, and cost comparison with alternative options." Chen's words carried the precision of someone who had lived these procedures daily. "And were these protocols followed for the expenditures we've discussed today?" Chen hesitated, glancing briefly at Coleman before continuing. "Not exactly. Beginning about 18 months ago, I received instructions to use more flexible categorization methods for certain high-value purchases." "Flexible how?" "Instead of listing designer gown for state dinner, I was told to write ceremonial equipment for diplomatic function. Instead of jewelry for official portrait, the description became symbolic accessories for representational duties. Coleman could no longer remain silent. Miss Chen, if such instructions were given, who specifically provided them? The directives came through Mrs. Patterson, the First Lattice Chief of Staff, but she indicated they originated from higher authority. Chen's implication was clear without being explicit. Patel pressed forward. Did these alternative descriptions accurately reflect the nature of the purchases? No, they didn't. We were essentially creating a coded language to obscure what was actually being bought. Everyone involved understood the real purpose, but the paperwork created plausible deniability. The revelation sent ripples through the committee. Several members exchanged troubled glances, while journalists frantically typed updates on their devices. Miss Chen, Coleman interjected desperately, isn't it possible you misunderstood routine administrative efficiency measures? Government accounting often requires creative categorization to fit rigid budget structures. Chen turned to face Coleman directly. Congressman, I have 8 years of experience in federal administration. I know the difference between creative accounting and deliberate deception. What I witnessed was systematic falsification designed to hide the true scale and nature of these expenditures. The accusation hung in the air like an unexploded device. Coleman's face flushed red as he struggled to formulate a response that wouldn't further damage his position. Patel seized the momentum. Miss Chen, do you have documentation supporting your testimony? I do. Chen reached into her briefcase and withdrew a thick folder. Before leaving my position, I made copies of particularly concerning transactions. These documents show the original purchase orders alongside the revised descriptions that were actually submitted for payment. The next 30 minutes proved devastating for Coleman's defense. Document after document revealed the systematic nature of the deception Chen described. Original orders for Valentino evening gown, $89,000 became diplomatic ceremonial attire, $89,000. Purchases of Cartier necklace, $340,000 transformed into symbolic representation accessories, $340,000. The pattern was undeniable and deeply troubling. Even Republican committee members who had initially supported Coleman's position began asking pointed questions about oversight procedures and authorization protocols. But Coleman wasn't finished. As Chen concluded her testimony, he played what he clearly hoped would be his decisive card. Miss Chen, Coleman began, his voice carrying new authority, isn't it true that you were terminated from your White House position for unauthorized access to confidential files? Chen's composure flickered momentarily. That characterization is misleading. Please answer the question directly. Were you or were you not dismissed for accessing files beyond your authorization level? I was dismissed after raising concerns about these exact financial practices through proper whistleblower channels. The unauthorized access allegation was used as pretext for retaliation. Coleman smiled for the first time in hours. So you admit to unauthorized access. How can this committee trust testimony from someone who violated federal security protocols? The accusation was skillfully delivered, designed to undermine Chen's credibility without directly addressing the substance of her revelations. Several committee members looked uncertain, clearly weighing the implications of relying on testimony from a dismissed employee with questionable access privileges. Patel recognized the critical moment. Chen's testimony was powerful, but Coleman's counterattack threatened to neutralize its impact. The sealed envelope in his briefcase had remained untouched throughout the proceedings, but now seemed like the only way to definitively settle the matter. Mr. Chairman, Patel said slowly, I believe it's time to address the elephant in the room. Every eye in the chamber focused on him as he reached for the envelope that had tantalized observers for hours. Congressman Coleman has repeatedly questioned the legitimacy of our documentation and the credibility of our witnesses. But what if the administration's own internal communications supported everything we've presented today? Coleman's confident expression evaporated instantly. Mr. Chairman, I demand to know the source and legal status of any alleged internal communications before they're presented to this committee. These communications were obtained through a Freedom of Information Act request filed 6 months ago, Patel replied. The administration fought disclosure, but a federal judge ruled them subject to public oversight under government transparency statutes. The envelope's contents emerged slowly, dramatically. Email printouts, memoranda, and internal reports that painted a devastating picture of deliberate coordination to hide extravagant spending from congressional oversight. The first email was dated 14 months earlier, from Mrs. Patterson to the White House budget director. We need to discuss alternative presentation methods for FL expenditures. Current transparency levels creating unnecessary complications with oversight committees. The second document was even more damaging, a strategy memo outlining specific techniques for optimizing expenditure descriptions to minimize political exposure while maintaining operational flexibility. But the final document was the nuclear option. A printed email from Mrs. Patterson to her deputy. POTUS wants maximum discretion on FL spending. Use whatever categories necessary to keep congressional busybodies from micromanaging every purchase. They don't need to know every detail of what it costs to properly represent America. The chamber erupted. The reference to keeping congressional busybodies from oversight struck directly at the heart of constitutional separation of powers. Several Democratic members immediately began calling for expanded investigations, while Republican members sat in stunned silence. Coleman was visibly shaken but made one final desperate attempt. These alleged emails could be fabricated. Without proper authentication through digital forensics, they're merely propaganda designed to influence this committee's judgment. Patel had anticipated this final objection. Congressman, given your concerns about authentication, would you support subpoenaing the administration's email servers for independent verification? The question was a masterstroke. If Coleman agreed, the subpoena would likely reveal even more damaging communications. If he refused, it would appear he was obstructing the search for truth. Coleman found himself trapped in an impossible position. That would require careful consideration of executive privilege claims and national security implications. National security? Patel's voice carried genuine incredulity. Are you suggesting that the first lattice dress purchases involved classified information? The absurdity of Coleman's position was now evident to everyone present. Laughter rippled through the gallery, and even some Republican committee members couldn't suppress smiles. Chairman Morrison called for a final vote on whether to recommend expanded investigation with subpoena authority. The tension was unbearable as each member cast their ballot. The tally was announced slowly, 12 votes in favor, 11 opposed. The motion carries. As the gavel fell for the final time, chaos erupted throughout the chamber. Coleman immediately began planning appeals and procedural challenges, while Patel accepted congratulations from supporters who recognized the magnitude of his achievement. But beyond the immediate political victory lay larger implications. The investigation would continue, public trust in government had been further shaken, and the balance of power between branches of government had shifted in favor of congressional oversight. Outside the Capitol, news crews prepared to broadcast the story that would dominate headlines for weeks to come. The afternoon's proceedings had transformed a budget hearing into a constitutional crisis, with repercussions that would extend far beyond designer dresses and jewelry bills. The three protagonists left the chamber knowing that while this battle was over, the broader confrontation over transparency, accountability, and the proper limits of executive power was just beginning.